The rain hammered down like bullets on the cracked asphalt outside Cincinnati, and Caleb Hart's hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from the cold, but from the choice he was about to make. His daughter Maddie was home alone with a fever, his truck was burning its last fumes of gas, and his shift at Riverbend Diner started in 20 minutes. Every rational cell in his body screamed at him to keep driving, but there, illuminated by his one working headlight, stood an elderly man in an expensive suit, soaked to the bone, beside a smoking black sedan that looked like it cost more than Caleb would earn in 5 years. Caleb's foot hovered over the gas pedal. He thought about Maddie. He thought about the rent he still owed. He thought about every time someone had driven past him when he needed help. Then he pulled over. He didn't know that this single decision, this one moment of humanity on a brutal night, would destroy his life before it saved it. If you want to see how one act of kindness changes everything, stay with me until the end. And when you do, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wipers scraped across the windshield in a rhythm that matched Caleb's exhaustion. Back and forth, back and forth. Each pass revealed another stretch of empty highway, slick with rain that hadn't stopped falling since noon. The dashboard clock glowed 10:47 p.m. His shift started at 11. He was cutting it close again. Caleb's phone sat in the cup holder, screen dark. He'd already called Mrs. Chen twice to check on Maddie. The neighbor had been patient, kind even, but Caleb heard the edge in her voice the second time. "She has school tomorrow, Caleb. So do my kids." He knew. He knew he was asking too much, relying too much on the goodness of people who had their own lives, their own problems. 6 years old, and Maddie had already learned to fall asleep to the sound of her father apologizing. The heater in his 1998 Ford pickup rattled like it was trying to shake itself apart. Caleb reached down and smacked the dash twice, a ritual that sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. Tonight it cooperated, coughing out a thin stream of warm air that barely fought back the November chill seeping through the rusted door frame. He'd meant to fix that, meant to fix a lot of things. The road curved ahead, and through the sheets of rain, Caleb spotted the glow of hazard lights. His first instinct was to check his mirrors, make sure he had room to move into the left lane and pass whatever breakdown had happened. Traffic was light this time of night. He could swing around, keep his speed, still make it to the diner before Derek started his usual routine of checking the time clock and making examples out of people. But as his headlight swept across the scene, Caleb saw him. An older man, 70 at least, standing in the rain beside a black sedan that looked obscenely out of place on this forgotten stretch of highway. The hood was up, smoke or steam rising into the downpour. The man wore a suit, a real suit, the kind Caleb had only seen in magazines or on people walking into buildings he'd never have reason to enter. It was soaked through, clinging to the man's thin frame. He wasn't waving for help, wasn't on his phone, just standing there, one hand on the open hood, staring down at an engine he clearly had no idea how to fix. Caleb's foot moved toward the gas pedal. "Not your problem. You've got your own crisis. Maddie's waiting. Derek's waiting. You can't save everyone." But his hands betrayed him, turning the wheel right, guiding the truck onto the shoulder 30 feet ahead of the sedan. He sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching the man in his rearview mirror. The rain was coming down so hard it looked like static on an old television. "Damn it," Caleb muttered. He threw the truck into park and pulled his hood up, though he knew it wouldn't do much good. The jacket was 3 winters old and had more holes than waterproofing left. The cold hit him like a slap the moment he stepped out. Rain soaked through his jeans in seconds, and his boots squelched in the mud along the shoulder as he jogged back toward the sedan. The man turned, and even through the rain, Caleb could see the exhaustion in his face. Not just physical tiredness, but something deeper. The look of someone who'd reached the end of their resources. "You all right?" Caleb called out, raising his voice over the roar of the storm. The man blinked, as if surprised anyone had stopped. "My car died," he said simply. His voice was steady but quiet, refined in a way that made Caleb acutely aware of his own rural Ohio accent. "I'm not sure what happened. It just stopped." Caleb moved closer, peering under the hood. Smoke was still rising, but it smelled wrong, not like overheating, more like electrical burn. He didn't know much about cars, especially not luxury models like this, but he knew enough to recognize a problem that wasn't getting fixed on the side of the road in a rainstorm. "You call anyone?" Caleb asked. AAA? Tow truck? The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone. The screen was black. Dead? He said. I was on my way to a meeting when the car started making noises. I pulled over and... He gestured helplessly at the engine. I'm not even sure where I am. About 15 miles outside Cincinnati, Caleb said. He glanced back at his truck, then at the man, then at the road where absolutely no other cars were coming. Look, I've got to get to work, but I can't just leave you out here. There's a gas station about 8 miles up. They've got a phone, probably some coffee. I can give you a lift. The man studied him for a moment, and Caleb saw the calculation happening behind those tired eyes. Stranger. Middle of nowhere. Truck that looked like it might not make it another mile. Every reason to say no. I would be very grateful, the man said finally. They climbed into the truck, and Caleb cranked the heat as high as it would go, which wasn't much. The man pulled the door shut, wincing slightly as the frame groaned. Water dripped from both of them onto the worn seats. I'm Walter, the man said, extending a hand. Caleb. They shook, and Caleb noticed the strength still in Walter's grip despite his age. Sorry about the truck, and the heat, and, well, everything. You stopped, Walter said simply. That's more than I expected. Caleb pulled back onto the highway, his one working headlight cutting through the rain. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the engine's rattle and the wiper's rhythm. Caleb kept glancing at the clock. 10:53. He was going to be late. Derek was going to make him pay for it. You said you have to get to work, Walter said, breaking the silence. I'm making you late. Yeah, well, Caleb shrugged. Won't be the first time. What do you do? Server. At a diner called Riverbend, near downtown. Not fancy or anything, just a job. Caleb didn't mention that it was his third job in 2 years, or that he was barely holding on to it, or that Derek seemed to get personal satisfaction from finding reasons to write people up. Walter nodded slowly. And after work? You go home to... My daughter, Maddie. She's 6. Caleb's voice softened when he said her name. She's with a neighbor right now. Has a cold, actually. Should probably be with me, but... He trailed off. The sentence didn't need finishing. Single father? Yeah. Caleb's hands tightened on the wheel. Her mom left when Maddie was 2, decided she wanted a different life. Can't really blame her. This wasn't what she signed up for. And you? Is this what you signed up for? Caleb let out a short laugh. Nobody signs up for this. You just deal with what comes. They passed a mile marker. The gas station was still 6 miles out. Caleb's phone buzzed in the cup holder. He glanced down. Mrs. Chen. He ignored it. Couldn't answer while driving, couldn't pull over without losing more time. The gas station's going to be closed, Caleb said suddenly. The realization hit him like cold water. It's almost 11. They close at 10 on weeknights. Walter absorbed this information quietly. I see. Look, I live about 10 minutes from here. Small place, but it's dry. You could use the phone, get warm, maybe call a tow service or a cab or whatever. Then I head to work, and you're on your way. That work? Caleb didn't know why he was offering. Didn't know this man from anyone. Could be dangerous, could be crazy, could be a dozen things that would make this a terrible idea. But when he looked over, all he saw was an exhausted old man who'd been abandoned by his car and left in the rain. And Caleb knew, he absolutely knew, what it felt like to be stranded with no good options. That's very kind, Walter said carefully, but I don't want to impose more than I already have. It's not imposing if I'm offering. Caleb took the next exit, the one that led toward the cluster of apartment buildings where he rented a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor. Besides, I can't leave you at a closed gas station. What kind of person would that make me? Walter smiled faintly. A practical one. Yeah, well, I've tried practical. Doesn't seem to be working out. The apartment complex looked worse in the rain. The parking lot had potholes that had become small lakes, and half the exterior lights were burned out. Caleb pulled into his assigned spot, the one with the faded number 307 painted on the curb, and killed the engine. Home sweet home, he said with no enthusiasm whatsoever. They ran for the building entrance, both of them already soaked beyond saving. Caleb's keys stuck in the lobby door like they always did, requiring him to jiggle the lock while Walter stood behind him, water pooling at their feet. Finally, it gave, and they took the stairs to the third floor. The apartment was dark except for a small lamp Mrs. Chen had left on in the living room. Caleb could see Maddie's bedroom door cracked open, could hear the faint sound of her breathing, slightly congested but steady. "Shoes off," Caleb whispered, pointing at the mat by the door. "Maddie's asleep. If she wakes up, we're both done for." Walter nodded, carefully removing his expensive leather shoes. They were ruined, Caleb noticed. Probably cost more than his entire month's rent. He felt a spike of guilt. The apartment was small but clean. Caleb kept it that way, not because he was naturally organized, but because Maddie deserved better than chaos. The furniture was thrift store mix and match, a couch that sagged in the middle, a coffee table with scratches from Maddie's toy cars, a bookshelf held together with wood glue and hope. But the dishes were washed, the floor was vacuumed, and there were fresh drawings from Maddie taped to the fridge. "Let me get you some dry clothes," Caleb said quietly, already heading toward his bedroom. "And I'll make coffee, or tea if you prefer. Pretty sure I have tea somewhere." "Coffee would be wonderful." Caleb returned with a pair of sweatpants and an old Cincinnati Bengals sweatshirt. "Not exactly what you're used to, I'm guessing, but they're dry." Walter accepted them with genuine gratitude. "They're perfect. Thank you." While Walter changed in the bathroom, Caleb started the coffee maker and checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Mrs. Chen, 2 texts from Derek. "Where are you?" And strike 2 heart. He closed his eyes and leaned against the counter. He was going to get fired. He knew it, with absolute certainty. Derek had been waiting for an excuse, and now Caleb had handed him one. Late again. 3rd time this month. Didn't matter that Maddie had been sick. Didn't matter that his truck barely ran. Didn't matter that he'd stopped to help someone. Derek would make an example of him, and that would be it. The bathroom door opened, and Walter emerged looking almost absurd in Caleb's oversized clothes. But he also looked warmer, more alive. "Sit," Caleb said, gesturing to the couch. "Coffee'll be ready in a minute, and there's the phone if you need to call someone." Walter settled onto the couch, his eyes moving around the small space. Caleb wondered what he was seeing, the poverty, the struggle, the clear evidence of a life held together by duct tape and determination. But when Walter spoke, his voice held no judgment. "You have a lovely home," Caleb snorted softly. "It's a home. That's about all I can say for it. That's more than many people have." The coffee maker beeped and Caleb poured 2 mugs. He handed one to Walter and sat in the armchair across from him, finally allowing himself to feel the exhaustion that had been building all day. "So," Caleb said, "where were you headed? When your car died?" "A dinner meeting, business." Walter wrapped his hands around the mug, absorbing its warmth. "Nothing that can't be rescheduled. Must be important business if you're out in this weather." It seemed important a few hours ago. Walter smiled slightly. Perspective changes when you're stranded in the rain, wondering if anyone will stop. Caleb took a sip of his coffee. It was too hot and too strong, but it felt good going down. "How many people passed you before I stopped?" "I didn't count. A dozen, maybe. Perhaps more." "And you don't blame them?" "Do you?" Caleb thought about it. "No. Everyone's got their own problems. Can't expect strangers to solve yours." "Yet you stopped." "Yeah, well," Caleb set his mug down. "My daughter's got this thing she says. She heard it in school or from a book or something. Be the person you needed when you needed someone. I try to remember that. Don't always succeed, but I try." Walter regarded him with an intensity that made Caleb uncomfortable. "And when have you needed someone?" "When haven't I?" Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lost my job at the factory 2 years ago when they automated the line. Took me 8 months to find the diner work. Lost our apartment, had to move to this place. Maddie's mom left somewhere in there. Couldn't handle the stress, I guess. Then Maddie got sick last winter, pneumonia, and the hospital bills." He stopped himself. "Sorry. You don't need my life story." I asked. "Yeah, but you were being polite. I'm just dumping on a stranger." "Boy, sometimes strangers are easier to talk to than friends." Caleb couldn't argue with that. He checked his phone again. 11:17. He was officially over an hour late now. Derek would be volcanic. He should call, try to explain, but what was the point? The conversation would go the same way it always did. Derek didn't care about reasons, only results. I should try to reach someone, Walter said, picking up the landline phone. Do you mind? Go ahead, I need to check on Maddie anyway. Caleb walked quietly to his daughter's room and eased the door open wider. Maddie was curled under her purple comforter, her dark hair spread across the pillow. She'd kicked off her socks again. She always did, no matter how cold it was. He knelt beside the bed and felt her forehead. Still warm, but not burning. The humidifier he'd bought at Goodwill hummed in the corner, adding moisture to the dry air. She stirred slightly, and Caleb froze. But she just turned over, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was a baby. He watched her breathe for a moment, in, out, and felt the familiar ache in his chest. This was what mattered. This was why he worked doubles, why he ate leftovers from the diner, why he drove a truck held together with prayer and stubbornness. For her. Always for her. When he returned to the living room, Walter was ending a call. I've arranged for a car service, he said. They'll be here in about 40 minutes, and a tow for my sedan. Good, that's good. Caleb sat back down. You need anything else? Food? I've got soup, I think, or I could make eggs. Soup would be wonderful, actually. Caleb heated up a can of chicken noodle while Walter made another call. This one sounded like business, lots of professional apologies and rescheduling. When the soup was ready, Caleb brought it to the coffee table with some crackers that were probably stale but edible. This is incredibly kind of you, Walter said, accepting the bowl. It's soup from a can, not exactly gourmet. Kindness isn't measured in gourmet meals. They ate in companionable silence. Caleb found himself relaxing slightly, despite the disaster his night had become. There was something calming about Walter's presence, a quiet dignity that didn't demand anything, didn't judge, just existed. Can I ask you something? Walter said after a while. Sure. Earlier, you said you're barely holding on to your job. What did you mean? Caleb set down his spoon. My manager, Derek. He's got it out for me. I don't know why. Maybe I remind him of someone, maybe he just doesn't like single dads, maybe he's just mean, but he watches me like a hawk, writes me up for things he lets other people slide on, makes comments in front of customers about my reliability. Caleb's jaw tightened. Tonight's going to give him exactly what he wants. I'm late, I didn't call, and when I show up tomorrow, he's going to have a whole speech ready about responsibility and commitment and how some people just aren't cut out for the service industry. Will he fire you? Probably not tomorrow. He'll make me sweat first, put me on probation, cut my hours, make me prove myself. Then he'll find another reason, and that'll be it. Caleb rubbed his face. And I can't afford to lose this job. I can't. Rent's due in 2 weeks, Maddie needs new shoes, the truck needs an inspection, and I'm already behind on everything. Why not find another job before he fires you? With what time? I'm already working 45 hours a week at the diner, picking up every shift they'll give me. I've got Maddie on the weekends. When am I supposed to interview? How am I supposed to explain to another employer why I left? Caleb laughed bitterly. No, I'm stuck. Just have to write it out and hope Derek gets bored before he destroys me. Walter was quiet for a long moment. You stopped for me tonight, he said finally, even though you knew it would cost you. Why? I don't know, because it was the right thing to do? Many people know the right thing to do. Few actually do it. Yeah, well, fat lot of good it's doing me. The car service called. They'd be there in 10 minutes. Walter stood and started to fold the borrowed clothes. I should change back, he said. Return these to you. Keep them, Caleb said. Your suit's not going to be dry anytime soon, and you'll freeze in the car. I couldn't. You can, and you will. Consider it payment for the entertainment of watching me spiral about my job. Caleb managed a real smile. Besides, I've got 3 of those sweatshirts. Maddie keeps giving them to me for Christmas. Walter hesitated, then nodded. Thank you for everything. The ride, the warmth, the food, the clothes. You didn't have to do any of it. Yeah, but I did. So that's that. They shook hands at the door. The car service had texted. They were downstairs. Walter turned to leave, then paused. Caleb, may I ask where exactly you work? The name of the diner? Riverbend, on 5th Street, near the old theater. Why? Just curious. Walter's expression was unreadable. Thank you again. I won't forget this. And then he was gone, disappearing down the hallway in Caleb's old sweatshirt and sweatpants, carrying his ruined suit in a plastic bag Caleb had given him. Caleb stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the rain that still hadn't stopped. Then he checked his phone. 17 missed calls. 8 texts from Derek, each one angrier than the last. The final one simply said, "Don't bother coming in tomorrow." Caleb closed his eyes and leaned against the doorframe. He'd done the right thing. He knew he had. He'd helped someone who needed it, shown basic human decency, been the person Maddie thought he was. And it had cost him everything. He locked the door, turned off the lights, and sat on the couch in the dark. Through Maddie's cracked door, he could still hear her breathing. In, out, in, out. The only sound that mattered in his entire world. Tomorrow he'd figure something out. Tomorrow he'd call Derek and beg for another chance. Or he'd start making applications, or he'd sell something, or he'd find a way because that's what he always did. He found a way. But tonight, in the dark of his small apartment with the rain hammering against the windows, Caleb Hart allowed himself to feel the weight of it all, the exhaustion, the fear, the crushing pressure of being everything to someone who depended on him completely. He thought about Walter, wondered if the man had made it home safely, wondered if he'd forget this night by morning. Caleb would never forget it. It was the night he chose kindness over survival, and lost. At least, that's what he thought. He had no idea that across town, Walter Kingsley sat in the back of a luxury car, still wearing borrowed clothes, making phone calls that would change everything. He had no idea that his simple act of humanity had been witnessed by someone who had spent 40 years building an empire on the principle that character matters more than credentials. He had no idea that sometimes the universe notices when you do the right thing, and sometimes it decides to do the right thing back. But that revelation was still hours away. For now, Caleb just sat in the dark, waiting for tomorrow, trying to figure out how to explain to his 6-year-old daughter why Daddy might not have a job anymore. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean, carrying away the old to make room for the new. And somewhere in that storm, change was already coming. Caleb woke to the sound of coughing. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Still on the couch, his neck kinked at an angle that promised a headache. His phone dead on the coffee table. Gray morning light filtered through the thin curtains, and the coughing continued, wet and rough, coming from Maddie's room. He was on his feet before he was fully awake, moving down the short hallway on autopilot. Maddie was sitting up in bed, her small body shaking with each cough, her face flushed with fever. The humidifier had run dry sometime in the night. "Hey, baby," Caleb said softly, sitting on the edge of her bed and placing a hand on her back. "I've got you. Just breathe." The coughing fit subsided after a minute, leaving Maddie exhausted and teary-eyed. She looked up at him with those big brown eyes that were exactly like his, and Caleb felt his heart crack a little. "My throat hurts," she whispered. "I know. Let me get you some medicine and water, okay?" He filled the humidifier, gave her children's ibuprofen and half a glass of water, then sat with her while she drank it in small sips. Her forehead was hot under his palm, not dangerously so, but enough to make him worry. "No school today?" he said gently. "But I have show and tell," Maddie protested weakly. "I was going to bring Mr. Hops." She gestured at the stuffed rabbit. "Mr. Hops will understand. He wants you to get better." Maddie's lower lip trembled. "You have to go to work." Caleb's stomach dropped. He'd managed to avoid thinking about it for the last 6 hours, but now it came rushing back. Derek's texts, the final one. "Don't bother coming in tomorrow." "Actually," Caleb said slowly, "I might be staying home with you today." "Really?" Maddie's face lit up despite her fever. "We can watch movies?" "Yeah, sweetheart, we can watch movies." She settled back against her pillows, already looking drowsy from the medicine. Caleb stayed until her breathing evened out, then returned to the living room and plugged in his phone. While it charged, he made coffee and tried to think. The rational part of his brain said to call Derek immediately, apologize profusely, beg for his job back. The proud part, The part that was tired of being humiliated. Said Derek had already made his decision, and groveling would only make it worse. His phone buzzed to life, and notifications flooded in. More texts from Derek from last night, 3 voicemails, 2 missed calls from Mrs. Chen, and 1 text from a number he didn't recognize, sent at 6:47 this morning. This is Walter. I hope you and Maddie are well. Thank you again for your kindness. Caleb stared at the message. He'd given Walter his number? He didn't remember doing that, but the night had been such a blur. He typed back, "We're okay. Hope you got home safe." The response came almost immediately. "I did. Thanks to you." Caleb set the phone down and picked up Derek's first voicemail. His manager's voice was tight with anger. "Hart, I don't know what your problem is, but you've got exactly 1 chance to explain yourself. Call me back. Now." The second voicemail, left an hour later, was worse. "You know what? Don't bother. I'm done making excuses for you, done covering when you're late, done pretending you're reliable. You're finished at Riverbend. Come pick up your last check whenever." The third voicemail, from just 20 minutes ago, was almost cheerful in its cruelty. "Actually, scratch that. Come in this morning, 10 o'clock. I want to do this in person. Let everyone see what happens when you think the rules don't apply to you. Don't be late, Hart. Oh, wait. That's kind of your thing, isn't it?" Caleb deleted all 3 messages and sat with his head in his hands. 10 o'clock, 3 hours from now. Derek wanted an audience for his execution. He could not go. Could stay home with Maddie, let Derek mail the check, avoid the humiliation, but he'd worked at Riverbend for 9 months, and he knew how Derek operated. If Caleb didn't show, Derek would tell everyone he'd quit, abandon his shift, proved he was exactly as unreliable as Derek always said. The other servers would believe it because Derek was management and Caleb was just Caleb, and the story would follow him to every other diner in Cincinnati. No, he had to go, had to face it. Mrs. Chen answered on the second ring, her voice warm but cautious. "Caleb?" "Hi, Mrs. Chen. I know I'm asking a lot, but Maddie's still sick, and I have to run out for a couple hours this morning. Is there any way—" "Bring her over," Mrs. Chen said, and Caleb nearly wept with relief. "My kids are at school and I'm working from home today. She can rest on the couch." "Thank you. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He got Maddie dressed in her warmest pajamas and wrapped her in her favorite blanket. She was sleepy and pliant, leaning against him as he carried her down the stairs and buckled her into the back seat of the truck. The rain had stopped, but the sky was heavy with the promise of more. Mrs. Chen lived 2 floors down in a unit that was identical to Caleb's but somehow felt twice as large and 10 times warmer. She took Maddie with gentle efficiency, settling her on the couch, with pillows, and a cup of weak tea. "Take your time," Mrs. Chen said to Caleb. "We'll be fine." "I owe you," Caleb said. "Seriously, I don't know what I'd do without—" "You'd figure it out. You always do." She gave him a meaningful look. "But you don't have to do it alone, Caleb. That's what neighbors are for." The drive to Riverbend took 15 minutes through morning traffic. Caleb's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was racing. What would he say? How would he explain? Should he even try, or just let Derek have his moment and leave with whatever dignity he could salvage? The truck coughed twice, pulling into the parking lot, and Caleb sent up a silent prayer that it would start again when he needed to leave. He sat in the cab for a moment, staring at the diner's familiar facade. Riverbend wasn't much. A converted gas station with a long counter, a dozen booths, and a kitchen that was always 10 degrees too hot. But it had been steady work, and steady work was everything. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked exhausted, unshaven, wearing the same wrinkled shirt he'd slept in. Derek would love that. Another point in his favor, another detail to mention when he told the story later. Caleb got out of the truck and walked toward the entrance. Through the large front windows, he could see the morning rush was winding down. A few regulars at the counter, 2 tables occupied, Derek standing near the register talking to Lisa, one of the other servers. She saw Caleb coming and her expression shifted. Sympathy, embarrassment, something that made Caleb's jaw tighten. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. The diner smelled like coffee and bacon grease and the industrial cleaner they used on the floors. Conversations didn't stop, but they quieted. Everyone was watching. Derek turned from the register, and his face split into a smile that made Caleb's skin crawl. "Well, well," Derek said loudly enough for the entire diner to hear. "Look who decided to show up, Mr. Caleb Hart, gracing us with his presence. Only 3 hours late this time, instead of a whole shift. That's progress, right?" Caleb stopped a few feet from the register. "Can we do this in your office?" "Why would we do that?" Derek's smile widened. He was enjoying this, feeding on it. "Everyone here deserves to know why standards matter. Why reliability matters. You think you're special, Hart? Think the rules don't apply to you?" "I had an emergency last night." "An emergency?" Derek laughed. "Right. Let me guess. Your truck broke down, your kid was sick, someone needed help on the side of the road?" He said it mockingly, like these were absurd excuses instead of Caleb's actual life. "All three, actually," Caleb said quietly. "Of course they were. And you couldn't call? Couldn't text? Couldn't show even basic respect for your job, your coworkers, your customers?" Lisa shifted uncomfortably behind Derek. Two other servers, Marcus and Jenny, were watching from the kitchen window. At the counter, Old Man Patterson, who came in every morning for the same breakfast, was frowning into his coffee. "I should have called," Caleb admitted. "You're right. But my phone was dead, and by the time I could charge it—" "Excuses," Derek cut him off. "That's all you've got, excuses and sob stories. You know how many times you've been late this month?" 7. 7 times. You know how many write-ups you have? 4. I've been more than patient with you, Hart, more than fair. And this is how you repay me? "I work hard," Caleb said, and he hated how defensive he sounded. "I take extra shifts, I stay late. I've never complained." "You work hard?" Derek's voice rose. "You think showing up, when you bother to show up, is the same as working hard? You think I don't see you in the back, exhausted, half asleep on your feet? You think customers don't notice when you forget their orders or mix up their checks?" "That happened once. It happened 3 times. And I covered for you because I felt sorry for you, because everyone knows you're struggling, because I thought maybe you'd figure it out." Derek shook his head. "But you haven't figured it out. You're still the same unreliable, irresponsible mess you were when you started." The words hit like physical blows. Caleb felt heat rising in his chest, felt the anger and humiliation mixing into something dangerous. He wanted to defend himself, wanted to list every sacrifice he'd made, every impossible choice, every night he'd gone without sleep to make sure Maddie had what she needed. But what was the point? Derek didn't care? Derek had never cared. "So what now?" Caleb asked. "You want me to beg? Want me to apologize in front of everyone? Will that make you happy?" "I want you gone," Derek said flatly. "I'm terminating your employment effective immediately, for repeated tardiness, unreliability, and failure to meet the standards of this establishment." There it was. The words Caleb had known were coming, but still hit like a sledgehammer. He stood there, aware of every eye on him, every whispered conversation pausing to watch him absorb the blow. "Fine," Caleb said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "I'll get my things. Already boxed them up for you." Derek gestured to the cardboard box on the counter. Caleb's spare apron, his name tag, a coffee mug Maddie had given him with "World's Best Dad" painted on it. "Save you the trip." Caleb walked to the counter and picked up the box. It was light. 9 months of work, and it all fit in a box you could carry with one hand. He turned to leave, then stopped. Old Man Patterson was looking at him with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. "Mr. Patterson," Caleb said quietly, "I'm sorry I won't be serving your breakfast anymore." Patterson nodded slowly. "You were always good to me, son. Always respectful. That matters." "Not to everyone," Caleb said, glancing at Derek. He walked toward the door, and Lisa caught his arm as he passed. "Caleb, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "He's been planning this all morning. He was happy about it." "I know," Caleb said. "It's okay." "It's not okay. You're a good person. Better than most of us." Caleb didn't trust himself to respond. He just nodded and kept walking. The bell chimed again as he stepped outside into the gray morning. The parking lot was quiet. His truck sat in the corner, looking as defeated as he felt. He set the box on the passenger seat and climbed behind the wheel. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught with a shudder. Caleb sat there, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. He just lost his job. The job that paid rent, that bought groceries, that kept the lights on, and Maddie and shoes that fit. The job he'd hated and clung to in equal measure because it was all he had. And for what? For helping someone. For choosing kindness over self-preservation. For being the person he wanted Maddie to think he was. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Chen. Maddie's sleeping. Take your time. Caleb closed his eyes. He didn't have time. He had negative time. He needed to figure out his next move. Needed to start calling other diners. Needed to check if his unemployment would cover even half of what he needed. But instead, he just sat there in the parking lot of Riverbend Diner, holding on to the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart completely. He didn't see the black luxury sedan pull into the parking lot across the street. Didn't notice the elderly man in the back seat wearing an expensive suit again, watching through tinted windows. Didn't hear the quiet conversation happening inside that car, or the phone calls being made, or the plans being set in motion. Walter Kingsley had spent 40 years building businesses, and he'd learned early that you could tell everything about a person by watching how they treated people who couldn't help them in return. He'd watched Caleb stop in the rain for a stranger. He'd sat in Caleb's modest apartment and seen the evidence of a man who put his daughter above his own comfort. He'd listened to Caleb talk about his struggles without once asking for pity or help. And now, from across the street, Walter had watched Derek Vaughn humiliate that same man in front of customers and coworkers for the crime of showing basic human decency. Walter had seen enough. He made one more call, his voice calm and precise. I need you to pull everything. Employment records, financial statements, customer complaints, the works. And I need it by this afternoon. The voice on the other end of the line confirmed and disconnected. Walter sat back in his seat, still watching Caleb's truck in the parking lot. The young man hadn't moved, hadn't started the engine, just sat there bearing the weight of another impossible situation. Mr. Kingsley, his driver asked. Where to? The office, Walter said. I have work to do. The sedan pulled away smoothly, disappearing into morning traffic. Across the street, Caleb finally started his truck and began the drive back to Mrs. Chen's apartment. He had no idea that his life was about to change. Had no idea that the old man he'd helped was about to help him back in ways he couldn't imagine. All he knew was that he needed to hold himself together long enough to pick up Maddie, take her home, and figure out how to explain that Daddy's job situation had changed again. The sky opened up as he drove, rain hammering down just like the night before. Caleb turned on the wipers, the same rhythmic scraping that had accompanied his worst decisions and his best ones. Back and forth, washing away the old to make room for the new. He just couldn't see it yet. Mrs. Chen was waiting at her door when Caleb knocked. Maddie was asleep on the couch, her fever finally broken, Mr. Hops clutched in her arms. How did it go? Mrs. Chen asked quietly. Caleb couldn't answer. He just shook his head. Mrs. Chen's expression tightened with anger. That man is a coward and a bully. You're worth 10 of him. Doesn't matter what I'm worth if I can't pay rent. You'll find something else. You always do. Caleb wanted to believe her, wanted to have even a fraction of her confidence. But standing in her doorway, his daughter asleep behind her, the rain soaking through his jacket, all Caleb felt was tired. Thank you for watching her, he said. Anytime. You know that. He gathered Maddie carefully, trying not to wake her, and carried her back upstairs to their apartment. She stirred as he laid her in bed, her eyes opening halfway. Did you go to work? She mumbled. Yeah, baby. Are you sad? Caleb smoothed her hair back from her forehead. A little, but I've got you, so I'm okay. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Mads. More than anything. She was asleep again before he finished tucking her in. Caleb returned to the living room and sat on the couch, the same spot where Walter had sat 12 hours earlier. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through job listings, making a list of places to call, trying to calculate how long his last paycheck would last. The math was brutal. 2 weeks? Maybe 3 if he stretched everything. If Maddie didn't need anything, if the truck didn't break down, if nothing else went wrong. His phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Walter again. I know this is forward, but would you be available for lunch tomorrow? My treat. I'd like to properly thank you. Caleb stared at the message. Lunch with Walter felt like something from a different universe, one where Caleb had the luxury of time and social obligations. But Walter had been kind, and turning him down felt wrong. He typed back, I appreciate it, but I'm dealing with some job stuff right now. Rain check? The response came quickly. I understand. The offer stands whenever you're ready. Caleb set the phone aside and leaned back, closing his eyes. The rain continued outside, steady and relentless. He thought about Derek's face, the satisfaction in his smile. Thought about Lisa's whispered apology and old man Patterson's quiet support. Thought about the cardboard box in his truck with 9 months of his life reduced to a coffee mug and a name tag. Mostly, he thought about Maddie, asleep in the next room, counting on him to figure this out. He would figure it out. He had to. Caleb just had no idea that the solution was already in motion, that across town Walter Kingsley was reviewing documents with the cold precision of a man who'd built an empire on accountability. He had no idea that Derek Vaughn's moment of triumph was about to become his greatest mistake. He had no idea that sometimes the universe keeps score, and sometimes it balances the books. The rain fell, washing the streets clean, and somewhere in that storm, justice was already gathering momentum. 3 days passed in a blur of rejection. Caleb had called 17 diners, filled out 12 applications, and walked into 8 establishments asking if they were hiring. The answer was always the same polite variation of no. Too many applicants, no openings. Try again next month. One manager had actually said, "We'll call you," while his expression clearly communicated that no call would ever come. Maddie's fever had broken on the second day, but she'd stayed home from school anyway because Caleb couldn't afford the copay for a doctor's note, and her teacher required one for absences over 2 days. It was a bureaucratic catch-22 that cost him another day of job hunting, another day of watching his meager savings dwindle. On the 4th morning, Caleb woke to find a notice taped to his door. The apartment management company, in their infinite compassion, wanted to remind him that rent was due in 9 days and late fees would apply after that. As if he could forget, as if the number wasn't burned into his brain, running on a loop every time he closed his eyes. He made Maddie breakfast, generic cereal with milk he'd watered down to make it last longer, and tried to keep his expression cheerful while she told him about a drawing she wanted to make for art class. She was going back to school today, finally, and Caleb was grateful for that small mercy. At least she'd get a real lunch. At least she'd be somewhere warm and safe while he continued his search. The morning bus picked her up at 8:15. Caleb watched from the window until it disappeared around the corner, then returned to his laptop, a 5-year-old machine that took 3 minutes to boot up and longer to load job sites. His phone buzzed. Another text from Walter, the 3rd one this week. Caleb, I hope you're doing well. My lunch offer still stands. Today, tomorrow, whenever works for you. Caleb had been avoiding responding to the last 2 messages, not out of rudeness, but out of shame. How do you tell someone who'd seen you at your most generous that you were now at your most desperate? How do you sit across from someone in a restaurant, even if they're paying, when you can barely afford to feed your own daughter? But something about this message felt different, more insistent, and Caleb was tired, so tired of pretending he had everything under control when his world was actively collapsing. He typed back, "Lunch today works. Where and when?" The response was almost immediate. "Riverbend Diner, noon. I'll meet you there." Caleb stared at the message, his stomach dropping. Riverbend. Of all the places in Cincinnati, Walter wanted to meet at the diner where Caleb had just been humiliated and fired. It felt like salt in a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. He almost texted back to suggest somewhere else, but his phone buzzed again. "Trust me, it's important." Caleb didn't understand, but he was too exhausted to argue. "Okay, see you at noon." The hours crawled by. Caleb showered, shaved for the first time in days, and put on his one decent button-down shirt, the one he saved for interviews and hadn't needed since landing the Riverbend job 9 months ago. He checked his reflection and saw a man who looked hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything vital and left only the shell. The truck protested but started, and Caleb made the familiar drive to Riverbend with his stomach in knots. He had no idea why Walter wanted to meet here, no idea what was so important, but a small voice in the back of his head whispered that maybe, possibly, Walter knew someone who was hiring. Maybe this was a networking thing. Maybe Caleb's one act of kindness was finally paying some kind of dividend. He pulled into the parking lot at 11:55. The lunch rush was just starting, cars filling spaces, people heading inside. Through the window, Caleb could see Derek at the register, could see Lisa and Marcus moving between tables, could see the whole ecosystem that had functioned without him for the past 4 days. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't want to go in there, didn't want to face Derek's smug expression or answer questions from coworkers about what he was doing back. But Walter had asked, and Walter had been nothing but kind, so Caleb forced himself out of the truck and walked toward the entrance. The bell chimed as he entered, and several heads turned. Lisa saw him first, her eyes widening. Marcus noticed next, giving him a subtle nod. And Derek, standing at the register counting receipts, looked up with an expression that shifted from surprise to annoyance in half a second. "Hart," Derek said flatly, "you lost? This isn't a homeless shelter." A few customers glanced over and Caleb felt heat creep up his neck. "I'm meeting someone for lunch," he said quietly. "Meeting someone?" Derek's laugh was sharp. "Right. Well, you're a customer now, so I guess I can't kick you out, but don't think you're getting any special treatment. You want a table, you wait like everyone else." "That won't be necessary." The voice came from behind Caleb, smooth and authoritative. He turned to find Walter Kingsley stepping through the entrance, no longer wearing borrowed sweatpants, but an immaculate charcoal suit that probably cost more than Caleb's truck. Walter's silver hair was perfectly styled, his posture straight despite his age. And when he looked at Derek, there was something in his eyes that made the manager's expression falter. "Mr. Kingsley," Derek stammered, and the sudden shift in his demeanor was startling. "I didn't know you were coming in today. We weren't expecting—" "Clearly," Walter said dryly. He turned to Caleb with a warm smile. "Thank you for meeting me. Shall we sit?" Caleb followed Walter to a booth in the corner, his mind racing. Mr. Kingsley. Derek had called him Mr. Kingsley, and not in the way you'd address any customer, but with the kind of deference reserved for someone important, someone with authority. They slid into opposite sides of the booth, and Caleb watched as Derek stood frozen at the register, his face pale, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Walter," Caleb said slowly. "What's going on?" "Patience," Walter replied. "All will become clear shortly." Lisa approached their table, her order pad shaking slightly in her hands. "Mr. Kingsley, it's good to see you again. Can I get you anything to drink?" "Coffee, please." "Black. And whatever Caleb would like." "Just water," Caleb said, his voice distant. His brain was trying to piece together a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Lisa hurried away, and Walter folded his hands on the table. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "Several, actually. Let me start with the most important one. My full name is Walter Kingsley, and I own this diner. I own 7 others like it across Ohio and Kentucky." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. "You own Riverbend?" "I do. Have for 12 years. I bought it when it was failing, turned it around, and hired Derek Vaughn 3 years ago to manage it." Walter's expression darkened slightly. "A decision I'm beginning to regret." Caleb's mind was reeling. The man he'd picked up on the side of the road, the man he'd brought to his apartment and fed soup from a can, was the owner of the diner that had just fired him. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so overwhelming. "Why didn't you tell me?" Caleb asked. "Would it have changed how you treated me?" "No, but—" "Exactly. You helped me because you're a decent person, not because of who I am or what I could do for you. That matters, Caleb, more than you know." Walter accepted his coffee from Lisa with a nod of thanks. "I've spent the last 4 days investigating this location, looking at records, talking to staff, reviewing complaints, and financial reports. Do you know what I found?" Caleb shook his head, unable to speak. "I found a pattern of abuse. Derek has been using his position to bully employees, create a hostile work environment, and drive away good people who didn't deserve it. I found write-ups for minor infractions while major issues went unaddressed. I found favoritism, retaliation, and a complete absence of the values this company was built on." Lisa returned with Caleb's water, and Walter waited until she stepped away before continuing. I also found your file. 7 tardies in 3 months, 4 write-ups, multiple complaints about your reliability. On paper, you look exactly like Derek described. Unreliable, irresponsible, a drain on the team. Walter's gaze was steady. But then I spoke to your coworkers. Lisa told me you covered her shifts when her mother was in the hospital. Marcus said you stayed 2 hours past close to help him clean when he injured his back. Every customer I spoke to remembered you by name and had nothing but kind things to say. Caleb's throat was tight. He couldn't process what he was hearing. So I dug deeper, Walter continued. I looked at the timestamps on your tardies. Every single one occurred on days when Maddie was sick or when you had documented car trouble. I looked at the write-ups, written by Derek for infractions he routinely ignores when other employees commit them. I saw a pattern of targeted harassment disguised as management. The diner had gone quiet. Caleb realized that other staff members were watching, that Derek was standing near the kitchen, his face white, his hands clenched. "Why are you telling me this?" Caleb asked. "Because I'm about to correct a significant mistake." Walter stood, and his voice carried across the entire restaurant. "Could I have everyone's attention, please?" Conversations died. Silverware stopped clinking. Every person in Riverbend Diner turned to look at the elderly man in the expensive suit standing in the corner booth. For those who don't know me, my name is Walter Kingsley, and I own this establishment. I don't visit often, which is a failing on my part, because it means I've allowed problems to grow unchecked. He looked directly at Derek. "Mr. Vaughn, could you join us, please?" Derek approached slowly, like a man walking to his own execution. His earlier arrogance had vanished, replaced by barely concealed panic. "Mr. Kingsley, if this is about the heart situation, I can explain." "Please do," Walter said calmly. "Explain to me why you fired an employee for being late due to a family emergency when you routinely arrive 30 minutes late yourself. Explain why you've written up Caleb Hart 7 times while ignoring identical infractions from other staff. Explain why customer satisfaction has dropped 15% since you took over management." Derek's mouth opened and closed. The standards, I was trying to maintain." "You were trying to exert power," Walter cut him off. "You were using your position to humiliate people who couldn't fight back. That's not management, that's cowardice." The silence in the diner was absolute. Even the kitchen had gone quiet, cooks watching through the window. "I witnessed your termination of Caleb Hart," Walter continued. "I was across the street watching as you publicly humiliated a good man for the crime of showing basic human decency. You called him unreliable, irresponsible, a mess. Do you stand by those words?" Derek glanced around wildly, as if looking for support that wasn't coming. "He was late, multiple times, the rules." "The rules apply to everyone," Walter said, "including you, which is why I've reviewed your own time cards. Did you know that you've been late 43 times in the past 6 months? That you've taken unauthorized 2-hour lunches 17 times? That 3 different employees have filed complaints about your behavior, complaints that mysteriously disappeared before reaching my office?" Derek's face was red now, sweat beading on his forehead. "Those complaints were false. People trying to—" "One of those people quit because of you," Walter interrupted. "Sarah Martinez. Worked here for 4 years, excellent employee. Left because you made her workplace unbearable. She filed a detailed report that someone, I'm guessing you, removed from the system. Fortunately, she kept a copy." Caleb watched this unfold with a sense of unreality. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life. Walter turned his attention back to the dining room. "I built this company on a simple principle. Treat people with respect, and they'll give you their best. Derek has violated that principle repeatedly, and I take full responsibility for not catching it sooner." He looked at Caleb. "Caleb Hart, I owe you an apology. You were fired unjustly, humiliated publicly, and driven from a job you performed well. That's unacceptable, and I'm here to make it right." "I don't understand," Caleb managed. "I'm reinstating your employment effective immediately. Full back pay for the days you missed, plus a formal apology entered into your file, and removal of all write-ups that were unjustly filed." The diner erupted in whispers. Lisa was smiling. Marcus gave a quiet yes from the kitchen. Old man Patterson, sitting at the counter with his eternal coffee, nodded approvingly. Derek stepped forward, desperation in his voice. Mr. Kingsley, you can't just— I'm not finished, Walter said, and his tone could have cut glass. I'm also promoting Caleb to co-manager of this location. He'll share your duties, Derek, with full authority to make scheduling and personnel decisions, and he'll report directly to me, not to you. The room exploded in shocked murmurs. Caleb felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. Walter, I'm not qualified. You're more qualified than you think. You know this diner, you know the staff, and most importantly, you know how to treat people with dignity. That's the only qualification that truly matters. Walter's expression softened. I'm not asking you to accept out of charity, Caleb. I'm asking because you've already proven you're the kind of person this company needs. Someone who stops when others keep driving. Someone who helps without expectation of reward. Derek's hands were shaking. This is insane. He's been here 9 months. I've been managing for 3 years. And in 3 years, you've created a toxic environment, driven away good employees, and damaged this diner's reputation. Caleb will help fix that. If you can't work with him, you're free to resign. Walter's gaze was steel. But make no mistake, your authority here is no longer absolute. Every decision you make will be reviewed. Every complaint will be investigated. And if I find one more instance of the behavior I've witnessed this week, you're finished. Do I make myself clear? Derek looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to rage, wanted to do anything but stand there and accept this public dismantling of his power. But he also looked at Walter, really looked at him, and saw a man who'd built an empire and wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who threatened it. Crystal clear, Derek said through clenched teeth. Good. Now I believe you have work to do. And Caleb, I'd like to continue our lunch, if you're amenable. Derek stalked toward the kitchen, his face thunderous. The other staff tried to pretend they weren't watching, weren't thrilled, weren't already mentally spreading this story to every food service worker in Cincinnati. Caleb sat back down, his legs weak. Walter settled across from him again, picking up his coffee as if he hadn't just upended Caleb's entire existence. I know this is overwhelming, Walter said quietly. Take your time processing it. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, but I do need to know if you'll accept the position. It comes with a significant raise, benefits including health insurance for you and Maddie, and a schedule that will give you better hours to be with your daughter. You'll be expected to work hard, to learn fast, and to help me make this location what it should be. But I believe you can do it. Caleb's mind was spinning. Health insurance, a raise, co-manager. It was everything he needed, everything he'd been desperately hoping for, handed to him by a man he'd picked up on the side of the road 4 days ago. Why? Caleb asked. Why are you doing this? Because you helped me when you had every reason not to. Because you showed me who you are when no one's watching. And because I've spent 40 years building businesses, and I've learned that character matters more than credentials. Walter smiled. Also, because Derek's face when I promoted you was deeply satisfying, and I'm old enough to admit I enjoy a little justified revenge. Despite everything, Caleb laughed. It came out shaky and half hysterical, but it was real. I accept, he said. I don't know how to be a manager, and I'm probably going to make mistakes, but I accept. Good. You start tomorrow. Today, you're going to finish lunch with me, and then you're going to go home and spend the afternoon with Maddie. Tell her that things are going to get better now. Lisa appeared with menus, her smile genuine and warm. Congratulations, Caleb. You deserve this. Thanks, Lisa. He looked at the menu without seeing it, his brain still trying to catch up with reality. They ordered. Walter got the club sandwich. Caleb got a burger he suddenly had an appetite for. And as they waited for the food, Walter told him about the other diners he owned, about his plans for Riverbend, about the values he wanted every location to embody. Respect, Walter said. That's the foundation. Respect for employees, respect for customers, respect for the work itself. When people feel valued, they do good work. When they feel abused, they do the minimum required. Derek forgot that or never learned it in the first place. He's not going to make this easy, Caleb said. He's going to fight me every step. Let him. You have my full support, and more importantly, you have the respect of everyone else here. They've been waiting for someone to stand up to Derek. Now they have someone. The food arrived and they ate while Walter explained the practical aspects of the promotion, training schedule, management responsibilities, how to handle conflicts. Caleb absorbed it all, still half convinced he'd wake up and find this was an elaborate dream. Across the diner, Derek emerged from the office, his expression carefully neutral. He approached their table and Caleb tensed. "Mr. Kingsley," Derek said, his voice tight. "I've prepared the paperwork for Caleb's reinstatement and promotion, if you'd like to review it." "I trust it's accurate," Walter said without looking up from his sandwich. "It is." Derek's gaze slid to Caleb, and there was murder in his eyes despite the professional tone. "Welcome back, Caleb. I look forward to working with you." The words were right, but the delivery made them a threat. "Thanks, Derek," Caleb said evenly. "I'm looking forward to it too." As Derek walked away and Walter watched him go with an expression of mild distaste. "He's going to be a problem," he said quietly. "Keep detailed records of every interaction. Document everything. If he steps out of line, I want evidence." "You think he'll try something?" "I think men like Derek don't handle humiliation well. He'll either leave on his own or he'll make a mistake that gives us cause to remove him. Either way, this situation won't last forever." Walter took a sip of coffee. "In the meantime, you focus on being the best manager you can be. Show the staff that leadership doesn't require cruelty. Show the customers that this diner values their business. And show yourself that you're capable of more than you've been allowed to demonstrate." They finished lunch, and Walter paid despite Caleb's half-hearted protest. As they stood to leave, several customers offered Caleb quiet congratulations. Old man Patterson shook his hand. "About time someone put that boy in his place," Patterson said. "You're good people, Caleb. Don't let anyone tell you different." Outside, the sky was clear for the first time in days. Walter walked Caleb to his truck, and they stood in the parking lot, two men whose lives had intersected by chance and been changed by choice. "Thank you," Caleb said, and his voice broke slightly. "I don't know how to repay you." "You already did. 4 nights ago, in the rain, when you stopped." Walter extended his hand. "I'll see you tomorrow morning. We have a lot of work to do." They shook hands, and Walter walked to his own car, the black sedan that had been towed and repaired, now gleaming in the afternoon sun. He drove away, and Caleb stood in the parking lot, staring at Riverbend Diner with completely new eyes. He was a manager, co-manager. He had health insurance, a raise, a future that extended beyond the next rent check. He got in his truck and drove home in a daze. Maddie would be getting off the school bus in an hour. He'd be there to meet her, to tell her that Daddy's job situation had changed again, but this time for the better. The apartment felt different when he walked in. The same furniture, the same small space, but somehow it felt less like a trap and more like a foundation, a place to build from instead of a place to barely survive in. His phone buzzed, a text from Lisa. "Everyone's talking about what happened." Derek locked himself in the office. "This is amazing." Another text, this one from Marcus. "Congrats, man, you earned it." And one more from Walter. "Don't forget, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. We'll go over the management systems and get you up to speed. Rest well tonight. You've had quite a week." Caleb sat on the couch and let himself feel it. The relief, the disbelief, the overwhelming gratitude. 4 days ago, he'd been fired and humiliated. Today, he'd been vindicated and promoted. The whiplash was almost too much to process. The school bus arrived at 3:30. Caleb watched from the window as Maddie climbed down the steps, her backpack almost as big as she was, her face tired but happy. She ran to the building entrance and Caleb met her at the door. "Daddy!" She threw her arms around his waist. "I made a picture in art class. I can't wait to see it." He picked her up, something he didn't do as often now that she was getting bigger. "I have some news, Mads. Good news." "Did you find a job?" "Better. I got my old job back. And they made me a manager." Maddie's eyes went wide. "You're a boss now?" "Co-boss. Which means I help run the diner, and I get paid more, and we'll have insurance so when you get sick we can go to the doctor without worrying." "That's good," Maddie said seriously, "because my throat still hurts sometimes." Caleb's chest tightened. "We'll get you to a doctor this week. A real checkup. Whatever you need." They spent the afternoon together, Maddie showing him her artwork while Caleb made them a real dinner. Not stretching ingredients, not counting pennies, just cooking. It felt like luxury. That night, after Maddie was asleep, Caleb stood at her doorway and watched her breathe. In, out, in, out. The rhythm that had kept him going through every impossible day. He'd stopped in the rain for a stranger, and the stranger had changed his life. It sounded like something from a story, too neat and simple to be real. But it was real. It had happened. And tomorrow he'd walk into Riverbend Diner not as a struggling server, but as someone with authority, someone with a voice, someone who mattered. Derek would be waiting. That much was certain. The humiliation Walter had delivered wasn't the kind of thing men like Derek forgot or forgave. There would be battles ahead, power struggles, attempts to undermine and sabotage. But Caleb had something Derek didn't. He had the respect of the people who actually did the work, and he had Walter's support, and most importantly, he had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The rain had washed away the old world, and now Caleb stood on the edge of a new one, uncertain but hopeful, scared but determined. He went to bed that night with a lightness he hadn't felt in years, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't dream about drowning. He dreamed about building something that would last. The first 2 weeks as co-manager passed in a blur of learning curves and careful navigation. Walter had arranged for Caleb to shadow the manager at another location for 3 days, a woman named Patricia Chen, who ran her diner with the efficiency of a general and the warmth of a favorite aunt. She'd taught him the inventory systems, the scheduling software, how to read profit and loss statements, and most importantly, how to handle difficult employees without becoming one himself. Management isn't about power, Patricia had told him on his last day of training. It's about creating an environment where good people want to do good work. Remember that, and you'll be fine. Caleb had returned to Riverbend with a notebook full of observations and a head full of strategies. Derek had greeted his return with cold professionalism, answering questions with technical precision while offering no actual guidance. It was clear Derek intended to let Caleb fail on his own to prove that Walter's faith had been misplaced. But Caleb didn't fail. He learned the systems, built relationships with suppliers, started reviewing the books to understand where money was going and where it should be going instead. And he noticed things, small discrepancies that individually meant nothing but collectively formed a pattern that made his stomach uneasy. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks into his new position, when Caleb first saw something that didn't add up. He was reviewing the previous week's cash deposits while Derek was out on what he'd claimed was a supplier meeting. The register receipts showed $1,463 in cash sales for the previous Thursday, but the bank deposit slip showed only $1,200, $263 missing. Caleb checked the calculator tape, verified the receipts, cross-referenced the credit card transactions. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. There should have been more cash in the deposit than what actually made it to the bank. He could think of innocent explanations. Accounting error. A receipt recorded incorrectly. Maybe someone had made change from the register for a vendor and forgotten to document it. But the careful, methodical part of his brain that had kept him and Maddie afloat through 2 years of poverty whispered that he should look closer. Caleb pulled the records for the previous month. He went through every single cash deposit, comparing register totals to bank deposits, and found 5 more discrepancies. Never huge amounts, between $100 and $300 each time, but consistent enough to be alarming. In total, nearly $1,400 that had gone into the register but never made it to the bank. All on days when Derek had personally handled the deposits. Caleb sat back in the small office, his heart pounding. This could be nothing. This could be explained. But it could also be theft, systematic and deliberate, and if it was, he needed to be absolutely certain before he said anything to anyone. He checked the schedule. Derek had closed a loan last night, which meant he'd handled today's deposit. The bank bag would be in the safe. Standard procedure was to keep it there until Derek made the afternoon deposit run at 3. Caleb looked at the clock. 2:15. Derek was still out. The office was empty except for him. He knew the safe combination. Walter had given it to both managers as part of the transition. He also knew that opening that safe and checking that deposit bag without Derek present was crossing a line. The kind of line that could backfire spectacularly if he was wrong. But if he was right and did nothing, he'd be complicit in theft from the man who'd given him a second chance. Caleb made his decision. He knelt beside the safe, spun the combination, and pulled the heavy door open. Inside were stacks of receipts, some petty cash, and the black zippered bank bag marked with yesterday's date. He pulled it out and opened it. Inside were bills wrapped with a deposit slip. According to the slip, the bag should contain $940. Caleb counted twice to be sure. $710. $230 short. His hands were shaking as he put everything back exactly as he'd found it, closed the safe, and returned to the desk. He opened a new spreadsheet and began documenting everything. The discrepancies he'd found, the dates, the amounts, the fact that Derek had handled all the questioned deposits. The office door opened, and Caleb's head snapped up. Derek stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Catching up on paperwork?" Derek asked, his tone casual, but his eyes were sharp. "Just reviewing the accounts," Caleb said, keeping his voice steady, "making sure I understand the systems." "Find anything interesting?" The question hung in the air, loaded with meaning. Caleb's mind raced. Did Derek know he'd checked the safe? Had he seen something, or was this just casual conversation? "Learning a lot," Caleb said carefully. "Patricia's training was helpful, but there's no substitute for working with our actual numbers." Derek moved further into the office, and Caleb resisted the urge to close his laptop. That would be too obvious, too defensive. "The books can be tricky," Derek said, sitting in the chair across from the desk. "Lots of moving parts. Easy to make mistakes if you don't know what you're looking for." "I'm sure I'll make plenty of mistakes while I'm learning." "Probably." Derek leaned back, watching Caleb with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "But mistakes can be fixed. It's the intentional problems you have to worry about." Caleb met his gaze. "What kind of intentional problems?" "Oh, people who go looking for issues that don't exist. People who see patterns where there's just random variation. People who make accusations they can't prove." Derek's smile was cold. "Those kinds of problems can destroy careers." The threat was barely veiled. Caleb forced himself to remain calm, to not react, to give Derek nothing. "Good thing I'm just trying to learn the job then," Caleb said. "Good thing," Derek agreed. He stood. "I'm heading to the bank to make the deposit. Need anything while I'm out?" "No, I'm good." Derek left, and Caleb waited until he heard the exterior door close before allowing himself to breathe. His heart was hammering, his palms sweaty. That conversation had been Derek warning him off, letting him know that whatever Caleb thought he'd found, pursuing it would be dangerous, which meant Derek knew exactly what he was doing, and he was confident enough to threaten Caleb about it. Caleb pulled out his phone and called Walter. It went to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. He left a message, keeping it vague. "Walter, it's Caleb. Can you call me when you get a chance? I need to discuss something about the accounts. Nothing urgent, just want your input." He couldn't say more than that, couldn't accuse Derek without proof, couldn't start something he couldn't finish, but he also couldn't let this go. The afternoon shift passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Caleb served tables, checked on the kitchen, made small talk with regulars, all while his mind churned through the problem. He needed more evidence. He needed to document the pattern so thoroughly that there could be no doubt, no alternate explanation. But he also needed to be careful. Derek was watching him now, suspicious and defensive. Any move Caleb made would be scrutinized. That evening, after Maddie was asleep, Caleb sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and a legal pad. He went back through 6 months of records, comparing every cash deposit to register receipts. The pattern was clear and damning. 23 discrepancies, all on days Derek handled the deposit, totaling just over $4,000. $4,000 stolen in 6 months, an amount small enough to avoid immediate detection. Caleb printed everything, created a folder and hid it in his bedroom closet. Then he tried Walter again. This time, the older man answered. "Caleb, I apologize. I've been in meetings all day. Your message sounded concerned." "I found something in the books," Caleb said quietly, aware that Maddie was sleeping just down the hall. "Discrepancies in the cash deposits. Money that should be there, but isn't." There was a long pause. "How much are we talking about?" "Over 4,000 in the last 6 months. Maybe more if I go back further." "And you're certain these are actual discrepancies, not accounting errors?" "I've checked and double-checked. The register receipts don't match the bank deposits. All on days when Derek handled the money." Another pause, longer this time. This is a serious accusation. I know. That's why I wanted to talk to you before doing anything else. I could be wrong. Maybe there's an explanation I'm not seeing. Or you could be right, and we have a significant problem. Walter's voice was heavy. Don't confront Derek. Don't tell anyone else what you found. I'm going to send someone to audit the books. Someone Derek doesn't know. A professional investigator who can document everything properly. How long will that take? A few days? Maybe a week? Can you maintain appearances until then? Act like nothing's changed? Caleb thought about Derek's barely veiled threat that afternoon. I'll try. Be careful, Caleb. If Derek is stealing, and if he thinks you're onto him, he might do something desperate. People protect themselves when they're cornered. I understand. Good. I'll have someone there by Thursday. In the meantime, keep detailed notes of everything. Every deposit, every cash transaction, every interaction with Derek. Build an irrefutable case. They ended the call, and Caleb sat in the dark kitchen, staring at his laptop screen full of incriminating numbers. He'd wanted to help Walter fix Riverbend, wanted to prove he deserved the chance he'd been given. He hadn't expected to uncover theft, hadn't expected to be thrust into a confrontation with a man who already hated him. The next 2 days were excruciating. Caleb maintained his normal routine, learned his management duties, interacted with Derek with careful professionalism. But the tension was constant, a wire pulled taut between them, ready to snap at any moment. Derek watched him. Not obviously, not openly, but Caleb felt the scrutiny in every shared space, every brief conversation. And Derek seemed to be taking extra care with the deposits, double-checking everything, making a show of transparency that felt calculated. Thursday afternoon, a man named Miles Carter arrived at Riverbend. He was middle-aged, unremarkable in appearance, wearing khakis and a polo shirt that made him look like any other customer. He sat at the counter, ordered coffee, and when Caleb served him, he handed over a business card. "Walter sent me," Miles said quietly. "I'm going to need access to your office and your records, preferably when Derek isn't around." "He's got a supplier meeting at 4, Caleb said. "Should be gone for at least an hour." "Perfect. I'll finish my coffee and meet you back there." At 4:15, with Derek's car confirmed to be gone from the parking lot, Caleb let Miles into the office and unlocked the filing cabinets. The investigator worked with quiet efficiency, photographing documents, cross-referencing receipts, entering data into a laptop. "How long have you suspected something was wrong?" Miles asked without looking up from his work. "About a week? Maybe less? I started seeing patterns in the numbers that didn't make sense." "You've got a good eye. Most people wouldn't catch this. The amounts are small enough to slip past casual review." Miles pulled up another file. "But you're right, there's definitely money missing." "Can you prove it was Derek?" "I can prove the money's gone, and I can prove Derek was the one handling it. Whether that constitutes legal proof of theft is up to law enforcement and lawyers." Miles glanced at Caleb. "But between you and me, this is systematic theft. The pattern's too consistent to be anything else." They worked for 40 minutes before Caleb's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Derek's back early, just pulled into the lot." "He's here," Caleb said urgently. Miles closed his laptop and stood. "I've got enough for now. I'll need to come back, but this is a good start. Walter will want to see everything before we proceed." They left the office separately. Miles returned to his seat at the counter, and Caleb went to check on the kitchen. Derek walked in moments later, his gaze immediately sweeping the diner, landing on Caleb with suspicion. "Productive afternoon?" Derek asked. "Busy," Caleb replied. "Lunch rush ran long." Derek's eyes moved to Miles at the counter, then back to Caleb. "Right. Well, I need to catch up on some paperwork. Don't disturb me unless it's urgent." He disappeared into the office, and Caleb released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Lisa caught his eye from across the room and raised her eyebrows in a silent question. He shook his head slightly. Not yet. Not until they had everything they needed. Miles finished his coffee, left cash on the counter with a generous tip, and walked out without another word. Caleb watched him go and wondered how much longer they could maintain this facade before something broke. The answer came on Monday morning. Caleb arrived at 7 to open the diner, same as always. But when he entered the office to check the overnight deposit, he found the safe standing open, the bank bag from Saturday night gone, and Derek's employee file missing from the cabinet. His stomach dropped. He checked the security footage, rewinding to midnight. The camera showed Derek entering through the back door at 1:47 a.m., going straight to the office, opening the safe with the combination he knew, and taking the deposit bag and his file. He'd left 6 minutes later, and the timestamp showed this had happened just hours ago. Caleb called Walter immediately. Derek came back in the middle of the night and took the weekend deposit, he said without preamble. And his personnel file. He knew we were on to him. How much was in the deposit? Around $1,800. Walter was silent for a moment. He's panicking. People don't steal their own personnel files unless they're planning to run. How much did Miles document? Enough to show the pattern. We have evidence of the other thefts. Then we move now. I'm calling the police and filing a report. I want you to lock down the office, preserve any evidence, and don't let Derek back in the building if he shows up. Walter, I don't know if I can. You can, and you will. You're the manager, Caleb. This is part of the job. Derek's made his choice. Now we make ours. The police arrived at 9. 2 detectives took Caleb's statement, reviewed the security footage, examined the empty safe. Miles arrived with his documentation, presenting a clear timeline of discrepancies and proving that Derek had been the one handling the money each time. The evidence was damning. The detectives made calls, filed reports, and by noon an arrest warrant had been issued for Derek Vaughn for embezzlement and theft. The staff watched all this unfold with a mixture of vindication and shock. Lisa pulled Caleb aside during the chaos. I knew something was off with him, she said. The way he always insisted on doing the deposits himself, the way he'd get defensive if anyone asked about the accounts. I just never thought. None of us wanted to think it, Caleb said. But the numbers don't lie. Derek was arrested at his apartment that afternoon. The police found the missing deposit bag in his car, along with nearly $6,000 in cash and a packed suitcase. He'd been planning to run, to disappear before anyone could connect all the pieces. Walter called Caleb at 3 to tell him the news. He's in custody, Walter said. The evidence is overwhelming. Between the security footage, the missing deposit, the cash in his possession, and Miles's documentation, the prosecutor says it's a strong case. So it's over? The investigation will continue. They'll probably find more than what we documented. But yes, as far as Riverbend is concerned, it's over. Derek won't be coming back. Caleb sat in the office, the same office where Derek had threatened him just days ago, and tried to process it all. He'd uncovered a thief. He'd helped bring him to justice. And now he was the sole manager of a diner that needed leadership more than ever. Caleb, Walter said gently, you did the right thing. I know it wasn't easy. He's going to hate me, Caleb said. When this goes to trial, he's going to blame me for everything. Let him. You acted with integrity. You protected this business and the people who work here. That's what matters. That evening, Caleb closed the diner alone for the first time as the actual, undisputed manager. The staff had been subdued all day, processing the revelation that the man who'd ruled over them for 3 years had been stealing from them the entire time. Marcus approached as Caleb was counting the register. I just want to say thanks, Marcus said, for having the guts to look into this. A lot of people would have ignored it, not wanted the hassle. I couldn't ignore it, Caleb replied, not after everything Walter did for me. Yeah, but you also could have. You could have figured it wasn't your problem, not your money, not your concern. But you didn't. That says something about who you are. After Marcus left, Caleb finished the closing duties, did the deposit, documenting everything meticulously, photographing the cash, getting Lisa to witness the count, and locked up. He drove home through streets that were quiet and empty and found Maddie already asleep at Mrs. Chen's. Rough day? Mrs. Chen asked, reading his expression. Complicated day, Caleb corrected. But we got through it. He carried Maddie upstairs, tucked her into bed, and stood in her doorway watching her breathe. In the morning, he'd tell her a simplified version of what happened. He'd explain that sometimes people make bad choices, and when they do, other people have to make hard choices about what's right. But tonight, he just watched his daughter sleep and thought about the chain of events that had led him here. A rainy night, a stranded stranger, a choice to stop when everyone else kept driving. And now Derek was in jail, Caleb was running a diner, and somewhere in all of this was a lesson about how small acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways you'd never expect. His phone buzzed. A text from Walter. "The staff is with you. I'm with you. You're going to do great things at Riverbend. I'm certain of it." Caleb smiled and typed back, "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." The response came quickly. "You've always been worth believing in. You just needed the chance to prove it." Caleb set his phone aside and settled onto the couch, exhausted but satisfied. The hard part was over. Derek was gone. The theft had been exposed, and tomorrow Riverbend would open under new leadership, free from the fear and toxicity that had defined it for too long. He'd stopped in the rain for a stranger, and the stranger had given him a future. He'd found theft in the books, and instead of looking away, he'd stood up. He'd done the right thing even when it was hard, even when it would have been easier to pretend he hadn't seen anything, and now he got to build something better, something that valued people, something that would make Maddie proud. The rain had stopped days ago, but the streets were still clean, washed free of the old to make room for the new, and Caleb Hart, single father, former server, now manager, sat in his small apartment and allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst was finally behind him. The morning after Derek's arrest, Caleb arrived at Riverbend an hour before opening to find half the staff already there, waiting in the parking lot. Lisa, Marcus, Jenny, even Old Man Patterson, who usually showed up right at 7 when the doors unlocked. They stood in a loose cluster, coffee cups in hand, talking quietly among themselves. Caleb's stomach tightened. He'd expected questions, maybe some uncertainty about what happened and what came next, but the sight of everyone gathered like this felt ominous, like they'd decided something overnight and were here to deliver a verdict. He got out of his truck and walked toward them, trying to read the mood. Lisa saw him first and smiled, which loosened the knot in his chest slightly. "We wanted to be here when you opened," she said. "First day as the actual manager. Felt like it should be marked somehow." Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand. "You did right by us, Caleb. Getting rid of Derek. We wanted you to know we've got your back." The others murmured agreement, and Caleb felt something warm and unfamiliar spreading through his chest. Not just relief, but something deeper. Belonging, maybe. Or trust. "I appreciate that," he said, shaking hands around the circle. "But I didn't do it alone. You all made this place run even when Derek was making it hell. That's what matters." "Still," Jenny said, "you could have ignored what you found. A lot of people would have." "Not an option," Caleb said simply. He unlocked the door and held it open. "Come on. We've got a diner to run." They filed inside, and for the first time in the 3 weeks since his promotion, Caleb felt like he was actually leading instead of just trying to survive. He went through the opening routine with the confidence of someone who belonged there, checking the kitchen prep, reviewing the day's specials, making sure everything was ready. At 6:55, 5 minutes before opening, Caleb gathered everyone in the dining room. "I know these last few weeks have been rough," he said, "and I know some of you are probably worried about what happens now. So I want to be clear about a few things. First, nobody's getting fired or written up or punished for anything that happened under Derek. We're starting fresh. Second, if you have ideas about how to make this place better, I want to hear them. Management isn't a one-person job. And third, we're going to treat each other with respect. That's the only rule that really matters." "What about customers who are jerks?" Marcus asked, half joking. "We treat them with professional courtesy," Caleb said with a slight smile. "But we don't let them abuse us. There's a difference between good service and being someone's punching bag." Lisa raised her hand. "What about scheduling? Derek used to play favorites, give the good shifts to people he liked. Scheduling will be fair and posted 2 weeks in advance. If you need time off, tell me as early as you can and I'll work with you. We're all human. Life happens." They asked more questions, and Caleb answered them as best he could, making notes when he didn't have an immediate answer. By the time 7 o'clock arrived and Old Man Patterson took his usual seat at the counter, the staff seemed lighter, like a weight had been lifted. The morning rush was steady, but manageable. Caleb worked the floor alongside everyone else, taking orders, refilling coffee, clearing tables. He'd learned in his training with Patricia that the best managers didn't just give orders from the office. They worked beside their team, showed that no job was beneath them. Around 9:30, during a brief lull, the front door opened and Walter Kingsley walked in. He wasn't dressed in one of his expensive suits today, just slacks and a button-down shirt, looking more like someone's grandfather than a business owner. But the staff recognized him immediately, and the energy in the room shifted to something like nervous respect. Walter took a seat at the counter, and Caleb poured him coffee without asking. "How's the first day going?" Walter asked. "So far, so good. The staff's been great. Everyone's pulling together." "That's because they trust you. Derek ruled through fear. You're leading through respect. There's a world of difference." Walter took a sip of his coffee. "I wanted to stop by and see how you're settling in. Also wanted to discuss the fallout from Derek's arrest." Caleb glanced around, but the nearest customers were 3 booths away, out of earshot. "What kind of fallout?" "The prosecutor called this morning. They've been going through Derek's finances, and it's worse than we thought. He wasn't just stealing from Riverbend. He's been running a side operation, skimming from supplier payments and pocketing the difference. Best estimate is he's taken close to $30,000 over the last 3 years. Caleb's jaw dropped. $30,000? At least. Could be more. They're still unraveling it. Walter's expression was grim. He's being charged with multiple counts of embezzlement, theft, and fraud. His lawyer's already talking about a plea deal, but the prosecutor wants jail time. This isn't a slap-on-the-wrist situation. Does that affect the diner? The money he stole? Some of it can be recovered through insurance and restitution, but not all. We'll take a hit financially, no question, but we'll survive. Walter looked at Caleb directly. More importantly, we'll rebuild the right way. That's where you come in. Over the next hour, Walter laid out his vision for Riverbend. He wanted to update the menu, refresh the interior, create a culture where employees wanted to stay instead of viewing it as a temporary stop. He wanted Caleb to be part of all of it, to help shape what the diner could become. "I'm also giving you full management authority," Walter said. "No more co-manager title. You're the manager. You make the decisions. You hire and fire. You run the operation. I'll check in regularly, offer guidance when you need it, but this is your diner to lead." "Walter, I don't know if I'm ready for that level of responsibility. You found systematic theft that I missed. You handled a police investigation with professionalism. You've earned the respect of your entire staff in less than a month. You're more ready than you think." Walter finished his coffee. "Besides, I'm not getting any younger. I need people I can trust to run these locations, people who share my values. That's you, Caleb." They shook hands across the counter, and Walter left with a promise to return next week to discuss the renovation plans. Caleb stood there, coffee pot in hand, trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. He was the manager, not co-manager, not interim, not temporary, the actual manager of Riverbend Diner. Lisa appeared beside him. "Did Walter just give you the whole operation?" "Looks that way." "You deserve it," she said firmly. "Derek never deserved it. You do." The day continued in a rhythm that felt almost normal, and by closing time, Caleb had developed a routine that would carry him through the weeks ahead. He did the deposit himself, documented everything with photographs and witness signatures, and locked the money in the safe that had been rekeyed after Derek's arrest. As he was finishing the closing checklist, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Caleb Hart?" The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. "Speaking. This is Detective Morrison with Cincinnati PD. I'm calling about the Derek Vaughn case. We need you to come in tomorrow to give a formal statement for the prosecutor. Would 10 a.m. work?" Caleb's stomach tightened. "Yeah, I can do that." "Great. Bring any documentation you have, the records you compiled, the security footage, anything that supports your timeline of events. The prosecutor wants to build an airtight case." After he hung up, Caleb sat in the quiet office and let the reality settle over him. Tomorrow he'd have to relive it all, answer questions, potentially testify if it went to trial. Derek would know that Caleb was the one who'd exposed him, the one who'd documented his crimes, the one who'd brought everything crashing down. There would be consequences for that. Maybe not immediately, maybe not directly, but somewhere down the line, Derek would want revenge for the humiliation. Caleb pushed the thought aside. He couldn't live in fear of what Derek might do. He'd done the right thing, and he'd keep doing the right thing, whatever came next. The next morning, Caleb dropped Maddie at school and drove to the police station. The building was institutional and cold, all fluorescent lights and worn linoleum. Detective Morrison met him in the lobby, a tired-looking man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Appreciate you coming in," Morrison said, leading Caleb to a small interview room. "This shouldn't take too long. We just need your account of how you discovered the discrepancies and what actions you took." For 90 minutes, Caleb walked them through everything. The first irregularity he'd noticed, the pattern he'd uncovered, the moment he'd opened the safe and found the deposit short. Derek's thinly veiled threats, the decision to call Walter, the night Derek had broken in and stolen the deposit. A prosecutor named Sarah Chen took notes throughout, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Caleb finished, she sat back and reviewed her notes. "This is excellent," she said. "Clear timeline, documented evidence, no gaps in the chain of events. Derek's lawyer is pushing for a plea deal, but with testimony like this, I don't think we need to give him much. He's looking at real prison time." "How long?" Caleb asked. "If convicted on all counts? 4 to 6 years, possibly more, depending on how much money they ultimately prove he took. White-collar crime with this level of premeditation doesn't get treated lightly." Caleb tried to imagine Derek in prison and couldn't quite picture it. But he also thought about the money Derek had stolen, the lives he'd made miserable, the culture of fear he'd created. Justice wasn't always comfortable, but it was necessary. He left the police station feeling drained but resolved. This was part of the process, part of making things right. He'd see it through, whatever it took. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm to Caleb's life that he'd never experienced before. He worked hard but not desperately, managed people with fairness but not weakness, and slowly built Riverbend into something better than it had been. He hired 2 new servers to replace the positions that had been vacant since before Derek's arrest. He implemented a training program for new employees, created clear policies for everything from scheduling to customer complaints, and started a suggestion box where staff could anonymously offer ideas. Some ideas were practical and immediately implemented. Marcus suggested offering a weekend breakfast special that became their most popular item. Jenny proposed a loyalty card program that increased repeat customer visits by 20%. Lisa recommended partnering with a local coffee roaster for better quality beans, which elevated their coffee from tolerable to actually good. Other ideas needed refinement or weren't feasible, but Caleb made sure to acknowledge every suggestion and explain his reasoning when he couldn't implement something. The staff started to see him not as a boss, but as a partner, someone who genuinely cared about making their work environment better. Maddie thrived with the new stability. The health insurance Walter had provided meant she got a full checkup with a pediatrician who prescribed antibiotics for the lingering respiratory infection she'd been fighting. Within a week, she was healthier than she'd been in months. Caleb enrolled her in an after-school art program she'd been begging to join for over a year. He bought her new shoes that actually fit, replaced her worn-out winter coat, and started building a small savings account so the next emergency wouldn't destroy them. For the first time in 2 years, he wasn't living paycheck to paycheck, wasn't choosing between groceries and utilities, wasn't lying awake at 3 a.m. calculating how to stretch $15 across 4 days. One evening, 6 weeks after Derek's arrest, Walter stopped by the diner near closing time. Caleb was reviewing the next week's schedule when Walter knocked on the office door. "Got a minute?" Walter asked. "For you?" "Always." Walter sat down, and Caleb noticed he looked older than usual, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "I wanted to talk to you about something," Walter said. "I've been thinking about succession planning. I'm 73, Caleb. I've got maybe another 5 good years of actively running this company, and I need to make sure it's in the right hands when I step back." Caleb's heart rate picked up. "Okay. I'm promoting you to regional manager. You'd oversee Riverbend and 2 other locations in the Cincinnati area. Significant raise, more responsibility, but also more opportunity to shape how we do business across multiple diners." Caleb stared at him. "Walter, I've been a manager for 6 weeks. And in those 6 weeks, you've turned Riverbend around completely. Employee satisfaction is up, customer complaints are down, profits are up 12%. You did that. You." Walter leaned forward. "I don't promote people based on tenure, Caleb. I promote them based on character and results. You've demonstrated both." "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Then say you'll help me find and train more managers like you, people who lead with integrity instead of fear." Caleb thought about the night he'd stopped for Walter in the rain. thought about how that single choice had cascaded into everything that came after. And he thought about Maddie, about the life he could give her now, about the example he was setting. "Yes," he said. "I'll do it." They shook hands, and Walter smiled with genuine warmth. "You've earned this, Caleb. Never doubt that." 3 months later, Derek Vaughn's case went to trial. He'd rejected the plea deal, convinced he could somehow talk his way out of the charges. The trial lasted 4 days, and Caleb testified on the second day, walking the jury through his discovery of the theft with calm precision. Derek's lawyer tried to paint Caleb as inexperienced and mistaken, suggested the discrepancies were accounting errors, implied that Caleb had personal motivations for wanting Derek gone. But the evidence was overwhelming: the security footage, the missing deposit found in Derek's car, the pattern of theft documented across 3 years, the cash found in his possession. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and found Derek guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3, plus restitution of the full amount stolen. Caleb attended the sentencing with Walter. As Derek was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he looked directly at Caleb with an expression of pure hatred. Caleb met his gaze without flinching. He'd done nothing wrong. He'd uncovered a crime and reported it. If Derek wanted to hate him for that, so be it. Outside the courthouse, Walter put a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "That's the end of that chapter," he said. "Now we write the next one." 6 months after becoming regional manager, Caleb had completely transformed all 3 of his locations. He'd implemented the same cultural changes at each diner, hired managers who shared his values, and created an environment where employees felt valued and customers felt welcome. Profits were up across the board. Turnover was down. Customer satisfaction scores were the highest they'd been in company history. Walter started bringing Caleb to corporate meetings, introducing him to investors and other business owners, positioning him as the future of the company. On a rainy evening in November, exactly 1 year after the night he'd stopped for Walter, Caleb was driving home from a long day of visiting all 3 locations. The rain was heavy, visibility poor, and he was tired. But it was a good kind of tired, the exhaustion of meaningful work instead of desperate survival. Ahead, on the shoulder, he saw a figure beside a car with its hazard lights on. A woman, standing in the rain, clearly stranded. Caleb's foot moved toward the gas pedal, the old instinct to keep driving, to protect himself first. He had Maddie at home waiting with Mrs. Chen. He had responsibilities. He had every practical reason to keep going. But then he thought about Walter, about that first night, about how one choice had changed everything. And he thought about the kind of man he wanted to be, the kind of father he wanted Maddie to see when she looked at him. Caleb pulled over. The woman was in her 30s, soaked through, her phone dead in her hand. She looked at his truck with a mixture of hope and wariness. "Car trouble?" Caleb called through his window. "Won't start," she said. "I don't know what's wrong with it." "I'm not a mechanic, but I can give you a ride somewhere. Gas station, home, wherever you need." She hesitated, and Caleb understood that hesitation. Stranger in a truck on a dark road, every reason to be cautious. "I'm Caleb," he said. "I manage a few diners in the area. I'm heading home to my daughter, but I can't leave you out here in this weather. I've got a phone you can use to call someone if you'd rather do that." Something in his voice must have convinced her because she nodded and climbed into the truck. They drove to the nearest gas station, Caleb keeping the conversation light and non-threatening, trying to make her comfortable. At the gas station, she called a tow truck and her husband. When she hung up, she turned to Caleb with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I was out there for 40 minutes. At least a dozen cars passed me. You're the first one who stopped." "I almost didn't," Caleb admitted, "but someone stopped for me once when I needed it. Changed my whole life. Figured I should pay it forward." He gave her his business card, Caleb Hart, regional manager, in case she needed anything else, then drove home. Maddie was already asleep when he arrived, but Mrs. Chen was waiting with a smile. "Long day?" she asked. "Good day," Caleb corrected. "Different things now." He carried Maddie upstairs, tucked her into bed, and stood in the doorway watching her breathe. She had new pajamas that fit, a warm apartment with heat that worked, and a father who could finally give her the stability she deserved. Caleb's phone buzzed, a text from Walter. The board meeting went well. They're very impressed with your numbers. Keep doing what you're doing. He typed back, "Will do. Thank you for everything." Walter's response came quickly. "You earned everything you have, Caleb. Never forget that." Caleb sat on the couch in his apartment, the same apartment where he'd brought Walter that first night, though it felt different now. Less like a trap and more like a home. He'd upgraded a few things with his raises, replaced the broken furniture, made it comfortable for Maddie. But he hadn't moved to a bigger place, hadn't bought a new car, hadn't made any dramatic changes. He remembered what poverty felt like, remembered the fear of one unexpected expense destroying everything. So he saved, built a cushion, prepared for future emergencies while enjoying present stability. The rain continued outside, washing the streets clean. Caleb thought about Derek in prison, about justice served. He thought about the woman he'd helped tonight, about kindness rippling outward. He thought about Walter, about how one elderly man's faith in a stranger had created opportunities neither of them could have predicted. Mostly, he thought about choice, about how every decision creates a path, and how the best paths are often the ones that require us to be better than we think we can be. He'd stopped in the rain for a stranger when every practical instinct told him not to. That choice had cost him his job before it gave him a career. It had exposed him to danger before it brought him security. It had required faith when he had every reason to be cynical. But it had also shown him that kindness matters, that integrity pays, and that sometimes the universe keeps score in ways we can't predict or control. Caleb Hart, single father, former server, now regional manager, sat in his modest apartment on a rainy November night and felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt proud, not of his title or his salary or his success, but of the choices he'd made when choosing right meant risking everything. He'd become the person Maddie thought he was, the person Walter saw in him, the person he'd always wanted to be. And that, more than any promotion or paycheck, was worth every hardship he'd endured to get here. The rain fell, washing away the old to make room for the new, and somewhere in that storm, another person was making a choice that would change their life. Caleb just hoped that when they needed help, someone would stop. The way he had. The way he always would. Because that's what good people do. They stop. They help. They choose kindness, even when it costs them. And sometimes, if they're very lucky, the universe notices and gives them everything they never knew they needed.